Toto Wolff always sums it up very well. We are really bad. Hamilton has Ferrari in his head and he's definitely lacking that final bite. Lance Stroll needs enthusiasm for what he does, and I'm missing that at the moment.
Hello, dear Motorsport-Magazin.com friends and Formula One fans, to the 4th edition of the AvD Motorsport-Magazin with Christian Danner.
Yes, hello everyone.
You already told us at the end of the last video that Suzuka is your absolute favorite track. Did the Grand Prix deliver what you expected from it?
Well, yes and no. I mean, if you drive on a racetrack that you like because the track combination, i.e. the corner combinations, are too crazy and everything is just great fun, it doesn't mean that it's going to be an entertaining motor race. In other words, the entertainment value was, I would say, due to the extremely straightforward overtaking themes. Yes, I say average Formula One, yes.
If we take away the Red Bulls at the front, I think you could actually live quite well with the Grand Prix, but in this day and age or in sport, it's usually only the winner that matters. But not for us at this point. Of course, we also care about the losers, and I think it has to be said that probably includes Lewis Hamilton.
Yes, Lewis is quite atypical for him. Lewis Hamilton is a man who generally likes to put his historic position in motorsport in the foreground in motorsport to a certain extent. I'd like to say it's coming to the fore, to put it diplomatically. On the other hand, if things don't go quite so well, still we rise, we're still growing, and we'll get it all sorted out. He's above that. What is the case this year is that he is no longer so above it, because it is becoming I'll say a rather strange mixture is that what he says. From Suzuka, for example, he says the car is great and drives well and he doesn't know what's wrong and that he should be, but he is not. It's very cryptic what he says at the end of the day. I have to be honest, that shows me that he is already under pressure from George Russell.
If you look at the bare figures now, it doesn't look particularly rosy for Lewis Hamilton. In qualifying, inferior to his teammate, average starting position 8.75. George Russell, on the other hand, 6.5. Yes, Formula One is very close, but a trend is already emerging. Now you can say that last year it looked a bit similar at the beginning. Are the situations comparable, or has something changed in his case?
I'm sure something has changed. And that's because we must not forget that he has already said goodbye to the team. And that last bit of will, that you need to somehow make progress, to show that it's still possible in a situation where it's quite obviously not possible at all, at least as far as the team's expectations are concerned. Of course, it's more difficult to put in the effort when you're actually already said goodbye. I'm sure Lewis will think to himself one afternoon, so with the Ferrari, I would have been on pole right now. That's how I rate him. Now, here and now, if he'd had the chance. And these are all things that are not good, because the team then lacks that final will, that final bite. Yes, whether it's the 1, 2 or 3 tenths that he gains on Russell or not is another question, but I think that's generally the case.
There was also the story that Lewis Hamilton ended an interview after he was repeatedly asked about Ferrari, whether he was jealous of the Ferrari race pace and so on. Do you think that triggered a point in him where exactly what you just mentioned happened?
Yes. That's exactly what I mean. Logically, of course, that's at the back of his mind. Because one thing is also clear, I mean, even Lewis Hamilton doesn't have that many years, Alonso or not, the eternal Formula One driver. And he's running out of time to meet his own standards. And these are, I can still win this extra world championship title, because then I'll be the greatest of all time and not be equal on 7 championships with Michael Schumacher.
You've already touched on age a bit. Do you think that also plays a role for him in terms of his driving quality? Does he lose a little something there?
As bitter as it is, and I'm speaking from my own experience, you have to say, of course, that getting older doesn't necessarily make you faster. And yes, what Fernando Alonso is showing is fantastic, but who is Fernando Alonso racing against? Does he have a George Russell as a teammate? Does he have a Sainz or a Leclerc as a teammate, or even a Verstappen? No. His teammate is Lawrence Stroll. And I have to be honest, it's clear that Alonso beats Stroll. Whether this shows that you can still deliver the same performance even at an advanced age, I do not think so. And the ravages of time also take their toll on Lewis Hamilton, even if it's just that extra bite you need to get those 2/10.
The seating position was a big story last year. As a normal driver, you can perhaps understand that a little. If it doesn't fit properly, then it's simply uncomfortable. But Mercedes has improved on that, so it can no longer be an excuse, if you can put it like that. Russell even hinted at the beginning of the season that this car was developed for Lewis Hamilton. Is there anything else you can look for that might not suit him? And if it is then made to fit, will the spark be ignited again?
No, I don't think so. To put it simply, I don't think so. I think that's it. That's the car. That's what he has to deal with. And there were let's put it this way, no real balance problems or sitting positions. Toto Wolff always sums it up very well. We are really bad. And that's the issue that Lewis Hamilton will probably have the most difficulties with. Because that too, and I always refer back to my many conversations with Niki Lauda, because he said that you have to give him the feeling that he is the greatest. And the best thing to help you achieve that is success. A Grand Prix victory. And then you look at the result and say, clearly, I am indeed the best. And that's the Muhammad Ali effect. Muhammad Ali always said, the boxer always said, I'm the greatest, I'm the most wonderful, I'm the best. And that's a bit like Hamilton, albeit in a completely different way, but it's a bit psychological. And if the opposite happens, then you're in a downward spiral.
It's funny that you mentioned Muhammad Ali and Niki Lauda. I can remember a book by Niki. He once wrote about an encounter with Ali, and that was the only athlete with whom he couldn't find a common denominator from a human point of view. With Lewis Hamilton, on the other hand, it worked very well.
Yes, is correct, yes.
Now we have bad news for Lewis Hamilton. We are likely to have the longest Formula One season in history. 24 races, we've only had 4, but the Ferrari craving is unlikely to go away anytime soon. Do you think the rest of the year will be a pretty tough affair?
The way it looks now, definitely. You always have to take a look at Toto Wolff's analysis and his assessment of the situation, which varied greatly. Harangued from anger, this is bad, we can't afford it like this, to after Japan, where he said, yes, actually we were fast, we just made a tactical mistake. But sorry, they were nowhere in qualifying, nowhere in the race, and then he is saying they were actually fast. It almost sounds a bit like Norbert Haag in his early years with McLaren, Mercedes, when he praised the individual sectors, such like we were 4th fastest in the first part of the 3rd sector. And these are things that I don't like. I mean, I think we've talked about this before. I think Mercedes has a fundamental problem. The problem is that the car is not good enough technically. It's clear that it's not that far away from winning. You're not that bad in terms of the time gap, at least on one lap, but it's still nowhere near good enough. And Ferrari has shown how to do it, or at least how to put pressure on the opposition. This is a very clear case of well done, good job, and keep it up.
Let's leave the subject of Lewis Hamilton for the moment. I'm sure we'll be talking about him and his performances a lot more this season, and we'll head over to one of your favorite sections, Ask AvD. Under the hashtag AskAvD, you have once again sent in numerous questions to our expert Christian Danner. We are an interactive magazine here. It's not a frontal lesson. No, we get something from you too. And today we have another very interesting question from Thomas Adler, 4277, who asked, In the 1980s, was Formula One racing fairer or more unfair? The stewards intervened much less with penalties. I think this is a perfect arc now from the Japanese Grand Prix, because we had an incident between George Russell and Oscar Piastri at the end where nothing happened, but we have a steward's reasoning with 6 points long, forever long, and they just always say yes, no further action. What was it like then, and what is it like now?
Well, basically, of course there was. I mean, I experienced it firsthand. When I had an accident in practice, which was Michel Alboreto's fault, I was excluded from the race. The race director's name was Jackie X, and he said it was quite clear that the marshals had seen it that way. So of course it's a bit different now. The way it's handled is highly professional, and of course the steward's decisions are not only based on a very clearly formulated set of rules, but also on an incredible amount of data. They can all see who did what, who drove how fast, who steered how hard, etc. Then there are the onboards and, as the icing on the cake, the driver's statements. The question posed by Thomas is of course correct. Was driving more unfair back then? I would say it was rotted more often, and it was also seen less often, simply because you didn't have the technical means to see it at all. And secondly, and this has to be said quite clearly, there was a kind of basic responsibility that we had towards each other, because everyone knew that an accident like that could happen. Not just mean that one person drives straight ahead and then drives on again, but that the cars were much less safe, the tracks were much less safe, and that's why there was a bit of basic respect. The time when fair and unfair really got out of hand for the first time was, of course, the time of Michael Schumacher. I mean, we mustn't forget the Hill-Adelaide actions or the action against Villeneuve in Jerez. The Jerez incident cost Michael Schumacher all his championship points. So in the past there have been harsh or even very harsh sanctions, but you couldn't really understand it all. So the Schumacher-Jerez thing was relatively clear, but in the 1980s, there weren't so many camera positions that you could have seen everything.
By the way, we discussed the whole story about the Monaco incident over on our talk couch. You can check out the whole interview if you haven't already done so. You mentioned that Michael Schumacher was a bit like that. Wouldn't you say that it started with Senna against Prost, when you remember Suzuka as well?
Yes, and of course that was, I'll say it now, a classic that occurs again and again in the history of Formula One. Yes, things like that were, I'll say back then, it was less regulated. It was less regulated, and the FIA had a different structure back then. It wasn't as well organized as it is today, where there are all these stewards, where you have a professional race director. That often changed. Sometimes it was this one, sometimes that one. So yes, it is unfair. Wherever there is sport, there are also unfair actions. Were there more of them? I would say it wasn't the same as before, because the stuff that racing drivers are made of hasn't changed. You're desperate to get past the other guy, and any kind of emotion is natural, see Senna Prost. But of course it usually leads to some kind of not at all funny things or collisions. And of course you have to understand that over the years, the FIA, mainly thanks to Max Mosley, who started the whole safety debate in the first place, has clearly anchored such safety issues in the sporting regulations. That wasn't really the case before.
Before we come back to yesterday's Japan Grand Prix, a very important AskAvD question. How are you actually doing? How is your health? How's the leg? The question came up.
Yes, the question is not justified because I'm doing great. I was still skiing at the weekend. Everything is fine. But Christian, I have to ask you, how is your broken metatarsal?
Yes, everything is wonderful if it can be wonderful. The pain is limited, but of course there is a reason. Many of you were worried after Stefan explained in the video that Christian had injured himself, but I've also heard a lot of messages came to you.
Yes, the Christian who is injured is not Christian Danner, it's Christian Menath. So we've sorted that out too. Get well soon, of course, the most important thing.
Thank you. But all not so bad. Now let's get back to the sport and yesterday's Japan Grand Prix. You touched on it earlier. With Lance Stroll, Fernando Alonso doesn't necessarily have a benchmark driving next to him. The question that probably could have been asked more often, perhaps has already been asked, but now has to come up again after the Japanese Grand Prix, is Lance Stroll actually still viable for this team?
So the Lance Stroll is definitely not very consistently fast, even if he is occasionally quite fast. It's just that as a Formula One team, if you've just, I'll say it now, Aston Martin has worked its way up from the midfield to near the top. And if you want to attack a McLaren with a Norris and a Piastri, then you do not just need one top driver, you need two. And that, of course, justifies the question, can Lance Stroll do that? Because he has been driving long enough. He also knows the car inside out by now. So there's a little bit of upward development missing somewhere. But we all know that his dad is the boss and the owner, and the one who calls the shots at Aston Martin. And that's why I would assume that nothing will happen this season in any case. The only thing that could happen is that Lance, who has never given the impression that what he's doing is particularly fun and enjoyable for him, that he will get the idea himself at some point, talk to his mom and say, "Mom, come on, let's stop now, that was good and done." Only the consequences, and this is always difficult with such family structures, are of course unforeseeable, because of course it's also possible that his dad will lose interest and say, now I've put my son in a car that could go in the direction of a world championship fight, and now he doesn't feel like it anymore. So we're guessing a bit about the future and leaving it open. At the moment, I'd say he needs to add a few more briquettes to be able to reasonably keep this place.
Many viewers like to complain to us that Lance Stroll comes off too badly. That's why we'll take a quick look at the figures. We've already discussed Lewis Hamilton earlier. However, he is nowhere near as far behind his teammate as Lance Stroll. Average qualifying position this season for Fernando Alonso, 6.25. For Lance Stroll, 11.75. 5.5 grid positions further behind. Last year, the qualifying duel was 23-3 for Fernando Alonso. On average, Stroll was half a second off the pace. 4th place in the World Championship for Alonso, 11th place for Lance Stroll. These figures speak for themselves, and you have already explained the issue. The father is the team owner, but Lawrence Stroll is not just a father, he is also a businessman. And as a businessman, he naturally knows that in Formula One, points equate to championship places and money. Do you think the businessman will prevail at some point, or will the father always prevail?
I clearly believe that the father will prevail and nothing else. After all, if the son stops driving at some point, he can still take care of the business side of things or sell the team again, or even hand it over to other people or somehow continue to make a profit from it himself. We have to leave that up to him. But I do believe that the combo father-son is already essential there. Yes, I think so.
Now, Lawrence Stroll can do as he pleases in this racing team. Something changes in 2026 when Aston Martin becomes the Honda Works team. Do you think Honda will put up with it, in quotation marks, if there's a Lance Stroll in there?
I don't think they have any other choice here and now. After all, you can't enter into a contractual relationship with a partner like Aston Martin, i.e. a racing team, and immediately say that we decide on a driver or that we have a say here, there, and everywhere. I think the sensible thing to do is to concentrate on the technology and see if you can get it right first. Because one thing you mustn't forget is that Honda already had a bit of teething troubles when it came to this current generation of engines before they got it up to speed. I hope that they now have enough know-how to get to grips with the new generation of engines, which are really different again. And when everything is up and running, we can still say that we would like to have one. But I also think that Tsunoda shows that. And he is clearly a Honda man. They were happy to build him up at Toro Rosso, even if he did need a bit of an acclimatization. But now he drives really well and doesn't make any mistakes. So you could say that's also a good thing for Honda. Enough justification for Honda to say that we have done something for the Japanese drivers too. We have got a driver of our choice. That's the Japanese idea now. With Stroll, I mean, you could say they'd rather take a Leclerc or someone like that. But we'll see, and that will certainly be guaranteed in the contracts in some way.
The driver market is currently highly dynamic. Do you think that you're putting a bit of an egg in your nest if you only ever have one cockpit to allocate? You have Fernando Alonso, who you would like to retain, but you actually want to look elsewhere and could perhaps sign 2 top drivers right now, but has just filled this one cockpit?
So it's not clever if you're purely looking for success. But you do hear, I mean, when Mike Crack says something, Lance Stroll is always great, everything is fine, they are very happy. Yes, that's just the way it is. I mean, you just can't change that. That's just the way it is. And that's why I would honestly say, Aston Martin, if your own performance in terms of the World Championship, in terms of the Constructors' Championship, first and foremost, if you put a Carlos Sainz in there, the results would obviously be much better. But of course, there are other things going on in the background. The importance, the scale of values is not necessarily just to get a few more points for the Constructors' Championship. But in this scale of values that Father Stroll defines, the sun is also an important, an existential building block. All you can do is make life a little easier for Lance, make the car easier to drive. And he has had his highlights from time to time, but he's just incredibly inconsistent. So he wasn't really anywhere in Suzuka, but that could be different again in China. So as always, we'll give it time and wish Aston Martin the best.
Before we move on to our final section, what actually went through your mind when you heard Lance Stroll's radio message about top speed? I have to say that there was a lot of laughter in our office.
Yes, hilarity, you have to smile about it and leave it at that. Because, you know, when you talk about drivers who are not performing quite right now, you have to remember that it is still a pretty strenuous, pretty challenging job. And even a Lance Stroll, even if he's not quite performing like Fernando Alonso, he's allowed to say things like that. I have no problem.
Then we move on to the next and our last section, namely the AvD pit stop. Today we have something very special in store for you again, as there will be competitions in this section from time to time throughout the season. There's nothing to win today, but you can look forward to what it might look like in the future. A small example, I don't even know if you remember when we recorded this. We don't want to reveal what the solution is yet, but you drew a Formula One track.
I'm afraid of something.
Let's just have a look at it now.
My favorite route. So first a long straight goes downhill, then comes a double right-hand bend, then you come back and then it goes zang, zang, zang. And now it gets a bit narrower, always nice and uphill and downhill. You can see the C on the straight, wonderful. Then it's zang, zang again, back again. So then we have here hairpin bend, there are also slow bends. Oh, now I'm hoping that somewhere, yes, I still have to go over it somewhere. Not that easy. And now it's kind of like this behind, now it's left, left, long. Straight, yes, exactly, it goes like this. I think so. And then it goes like this. And there's another chicane, something like this. But you can see what it is. It's my favorite track. Perfect.
Yes, I'm going to assume Suzuka.
Yes, good. You can tell because it's such an 8. Logically, that's the only track.
That's only S and that's not SS. I think something is missing.
Yes, there's another curve in there. So.
But then, yes, the Degners.
Hairpin. Spoon straight. 130R. That's right there. Yes, this could be a bit faster. So 130R? Then it's around the corner.
But I don't know that corner.
Yes, you do. There it is, but yes, I made a mistake. There's the chicane. It does work. Yes, I know this little game. We used to do it at RTL from time to time. Recording racetracks, we used to have the current drivers draw them. So the current drivers weren't quite as bad as me, but I'll say this. I have Suzuka in my heart, and that's where it belongs. And I'm sorry that I didn't put it on the screen, or not halfway decent on the screen.
Do you remember who was the best and who was the worst illustrator in the paddock back then?
I remember Sebastian Vettel was pretty good, I remember, and that's all I remember.
Well, the bad ones are always forgotten, they're always left out, censored. But that was a little taste of what you can expect over the course of the season. There are also great prizes, including AvD memberships, but also tickets to racing events and 1 or 2 technical treats. So it always pays off twice and 3 times over to tune in to this magazine. For the moment, for the Japanese Grand Prix, I would like to thank our expert Christian Danner. And then I'm already heading over to Shanghai. I've become careful now with the pronunciation with China or China. I don't want to trigger anyone anymore. I think we'll agree on Shanghai. That's easier.
That's exactly how it is. I know the problem because all my friends, I'll say from the Ruhr area, from Cologne, have formulated an SCH with CH. I used a K with CH, like in my name. The middle way would be China. Grand Prix.
We're looking forward to it regardless of the pronunciation. Thank you very much.
Whatever the topic, if you have any questions for me, please use the hashtag AskAvD.